ও আচ্ছা, কানেক্ট নাই। ওইদিকে তাকাবো। আমার এজেন্ডা হচ্ছে পরিচিত মানুষের জন্য। শুরু করতে পারি। বাইরে যে
Shafat, light ki on. Light program start.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all. This is Nahin Sultana, lecturer, Department of Marketing, School of Business and Entrepreneurship, Independent University, Bangladesh.
And this is MD Ajazur Rahman, lecturer, Department of Marketing, School of Business and Entrepreneurship, Independent University, Bangladesh. Thank you for joining us on the second day of International Conference on Economics, Business and Technology Management, ICEBTM 2025. Yesterday, you showed tremendous energy and enthusiasm. We are expecting similar vibe today. We'll now proceed with the fourth and fifth keynote presentation for this morning.
We are honored to have with us Professor Dr. Raja Rasia from the University of Malaya, Malaysia, and Dr. Ahmed Ahsan, Director of Policy Research Institute, PRI Bangladesh, as our distinguished speakers for the session.
To preside over the session, we are pleased to welcome Professor Dr. Abdur Raub, Honorable Vice Chancellor, International University of Business, Agriculture and Technology, IUBAT, and Dr. Ben Bhefefe from Leeds Trinity University and CILT, United Kingdom as our session chairs. Gentlemen, would you please?
May we please have a round of applause welcoming our esteemed guests on the stage.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, just a quick overview of our session chair. Dr. Abdul Rob is a professor of management. At present, is the vice chancellor of IUBAT International University of Business, Agriculture and Technology. Earlier, he was the pro vice chancellor and vice chancellor of Eastern University, Dhaka, Bangladesh. He was a professor of Institute of Business Administration, IBA, in Dhaka University for over 33 years. He was director there for 3 years. He was also the Dean of School of Business, a Brecht Business School, and Professor of Management at North-South University. Mr. Rob is a visiting professor of International Business Management in the School of Economics and Management of Yunnan Normal University, China.
To say a few lines about Dr. Ben Wefefe, he is a specialist in strategic supply chain management design, implementation and operational performance with sound knowledge and practical experience in Europe, Africa, the Middle East and Asia. He has been an active member of CILT, Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, for 30 years, having chaired CILT Zimbabwe and served as regional chair for CILT UAE. I request Dr. Abdul Rob and Dr. Ben Wefefe to preside over this session. Sir, over to you.
Thank you. The two titles of the sessions this morning, one is Sustainable Industrial Upgrading and Climate Resilience, the Southeast Asian Experience. And this, the presentation will be made by Professor Dr. Raja Rasia of University of Malaya. Actually, I should invite the speaker first to speak, then we'll actually try to present our observation later on. Let me introduce Professor Dr. Raja Rasia, who is currently a distinguished professor of economics at the Asia-Europe Institute of the University of Malaya. And actually, University of Malaya is ranked quite high in the QS and Times Higher Education. Professor Rasia primarily focuses his research on technological innovation and economic development. Distinguished Professor Dr. Raja Rasia began to work on the economics of innovation after enrolling at Cambridge University to pursue his doctorate in economics in 1989. Since then, he has become a global pioneer in innovation and development. He introduced the systematic Quad model, transforming the impact of strategic clustering on global employment, wage, and sustainable development. I would request Professor Dr. Raja Rasia to speak before the audience.
Thank you for the glowing account presented about me. I was expecting my slides to be shown, but I'm not sure how things work, and I've actually changed. Maybe I go up there if it's going to be there. Thank you. Yeah, okay. Yeah, in the interest of time, I actually revised this so that I would present this in half the time. because I'm used to giving a keynote for over an hour, but I only got to know when I got here that lots of people with lots of credibility and fame who would I think bamboozle many of you here. This actually comes from a book that is forthcoming with Springer Nature, and it's from the first chapter. What I've done to focus on one particular topic, which is on industrial policy, is to remove the part on climate resilience and digitalization. And therefore, pardon me that it's not the same, but you can get the entire presentation either through the book or through the slides that I sent Professor Mamun. Now, I wanted to mention what's new in relation to what we advanced in relation to industrial policy, especially so when industrial policy has become popular now since the EU introduced the EU Chips Act in 2022, and of course at that time not Donald Trump, Biden and Kamala Harris introduced the Science and Chip Act in 2022, both of which called for massive subsidies as well as a rise in tariffs, going back to the old form of industrial policy. In these two, in some ways they are similar in the sense that you have monetary policy the same in the US, but fiscal policy differs with the states, and with the European Monetary Union, you have the same situation in Europe. Now, what I wanted to do is to chart through how industrial policy evolved. The typical old explanation of it by Alexander Gerstengrund was that it's easier to catch up because you can see countries above, you see the technologies they use, and therefore you can start with learning, except that learning requires adaptations extensively. Innovation actually starts with that. Learning is the first form of incremental innovation. You can distinguish that in the way Schumpeter did between incremental and radical innovation. Now, from that on, you have countries that evolve using that same path, including Korea. I think our Honorable Vice Chancellor often mentioned about Korea and the way human capital is developed to support that sort of development. But I think what is relatively new to extend industrial policy now is to be more explicit, to be able to articulate what are the steps in a taxonomy of things that shows you how catch-up takes place technologically, and the second, of course, that what sort of policies you require, governance you require so that firms actually progress. Now, I'll show that with the use of, in fact, you can look at that from this book that I did on Pakistan, which is actually looking at taxonomies and how firms upgrade in the trajectory to reach the frontier. Now, what I think I would like to focus on is to not just talk about Southeast Asia, as the title of my original presentation was, but also to include East Asia, to contrast and tell you what I mean by passive and active industrial policy. By passive industrial policy, if you're familiar with the work of Jagdish Bhagawati, he's done that with his former student Breacher, and subsequently he's worked on the same thing with Srinivasan. You can look at several journals from 1978, the earliest that I saw, simply because you had passive industrial policy then. The examples used then were the US and of course Mexico below. He made the point, departing from the Hexter-Olin model where factors of production do not cross borders, but they're perfectly mobile within borders. Now, in his case, he relaxed the condition on capital immobility. And his argument was that US then was a labor scarce country, a capital rich country. Factor-wise, interest rates will be low because it's a capital surplus country, wage rates will be high because it's a labor scarce economy. And you contrast that with Mexico, you have a situation where interest rates will be high because it's a capital scarce country, wages will be low. Somewhat like what we heard yesterday in the keynote. We don't want to hear Bangladesh being a cheap labor country anymore. And in fact, the articulation was we need to have speed to upgrade to the level where we no longer cheap labor country. Now, down here, this is passive industrial policy, I call it, because it's just about enabling markets. Enabling markets so there will be a capital flow from the US to Mexico, What that would mean is that the rising flow of that would lower interest rates in Mexico, and the converse would take place as more and more capital flows out of the US. Wages in the US would go down, while wages in Mexico would rise, until you have what they refer to as economic convergence. Very simple. But that's passive industrial policy. In my mind, countries that were even too poor to attract capital then created export processing zones so that whatever they required could be provided in those locations, including security in those locations. But those countries didn't really develop. They went to a point of becoming middle-income countries. In the two sets of countries that I mentioned, you can think about the Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia. They are middle-income countries. Philippines is a low middle-income. Now we have Vietnam joining them, those ranks. But they haven't breached out of that to come out of the middle-income trap. Now, my argument here is, this is a very simple articulation of that. Let me get going the wrong direction. This is the simple depiction of that, which I'm showing in relation to factor prices. As you start, you'll have high contrast between the factor of capital, which is interest rates, and you have the factor of labor, which is wages. You will have contrast down there, but when you have free trade, and then we are taking on the Robert Mundell, Ian Fleming framework of flexible exchange rates, then you will obviously have a specialization in low value added activities in the developing countries and the converse in the developed countries, capital and technology intensive, and the benefits that this brings. And if you continue to allow free trade, obviously you will have an equalization of wages, an equalization of interest rates, as well as per capita incomes. And that is to be expected from this argument about economic convergence. But unfortunately, as I mentioned to you with evidence, it didn't happen. Now let me, again, reverse way. Once you have this, in fact, I would advertise this book which just came out with Oxford University Press, where the title of the book, Industrial Upgrading in the Textile and Clothing Industry, Pakistan, and Late Industrialization. And now the point I wanted to make is, it's not just about selecting different industries. Restructuring today, technologically, the notion people had that you move from, say, making textiles, toys, shoes, and so on, you move on to make electronic goods and so on. Unfortunately, the real data doesn't really support that sort of argument. One thing that I want to make it clear is we have, at the moment, a huge rewrite going on with regards to global value chains. In textiles and clothing, for example, the guys in Taiwan, in Japan, in China, and Korea, they are as powerful as those guys who were brand holders, once considered the guys who control value chains. Not only because the global financial crisis made many of them bankrupt. J.C. Penney only today is a name, but it's owned by others. And most Western firms were highly geared. Under crisis conditions, most of them went bust. Second, the income levels of these middle-income countries. Now they are developed countries themselves. Korea and Taiwan's per capita income in 2024 already overtook that of Japan. So the demand is already there for their own type of clothes and textiles and so on. So not everybody just wants to buy Western style clothes. If you look at the structure of that, that's also changed. So the countries we thought that were poor are no longer poor. And a number of them are already more developed than Japan. So those things need to be taken into account. I also mentioned in that book, Nadia and me, of course I brought this information, Bangladesh in that sort of sense. You can look at that as well. Now that taken, this is notion of public good which I felt is necessary in the sense that when social returns exceed private returns, there's a need for intervention by governments, because the beneficiary is the entire society, not just the private owners of that firm or that technology. So this is a situation where you invest money on R&D, on technological upgrading. It doesn't necessarily mean extensive R&D. Then the knowledge that is generated from that, not all of them can be translated into property rights. And even so, if you have patents, copyrights, and so on, doesn't mean you'll hit the market to make money for you. Now, what is converted back Some call it development, some call it commercialization, some call it innovation. But a lot of that knowledge generated society benefits. You get different types of innovation, which is the notion of a public good. A public good is both non-excludable and non-rivalrous, which means to say you can, how much you impose intellectual property rights. America can go on complaining that China has copied from them, but you can't really establish everything as such, the way this is being explained. And non-rivalrous here means once created, knowledge is already there. You don't have to reproduce, spend money to actually produce again, unless you leave that intellectual property right in the hands of the creator. That's why society benefits a lot more from there, and then therefore that's important. I'm always working reverse. Now I wanted to mention this trajectory of governance. We heard governance yesterday several times. Now markets in economics we are dealing with relative prices. It's not about the industry out there, so to speak. Now today the SDG framework doesn't really emphasize only industry. It talks about industry with a societal focus. If you're just looking at profits, you're not looking at what the SDGs are targeted at. In fact, SDG 10 is about reversing inequalities. All that, and in many ways, it's in the interest of those people who believe in profits in the long run too, for it to be sustainable. Now, in value-added terms, if you just use relative prices, to what extent can you really overtake and upgrade in relation to relative prices? Much less. This is the point Ellis Sampson was always making, getting relative prices wrong. Asia's next giant, South Korea, and late industrialization. Now, of course, there was this debate subsequently with Danny Roderick. I'm not sure, I don't think I can explain in the question and answer session that Danny Roderick had the point. But in relation to this, interventions require that you're actually overtaking other firms around. You may not be at the frontier yet. And that requires careful appraisal. Appraisal that Amartya Sen talks about the carrots and sticks approach. There are times when you need to provide a subsidy, when you need to provide some sort of insulation. That is also important. Now this is a situation, I would say, you have a situation in South Korea using largely national capital, Taiwan largely national capital. The share of FDI and gross fixed capital formation in these countries were always low, not more than 5%. Now talking about Hong Kong, both national and foreign capital, a lot of which registered in Hong Kong and worked throughout the whole region. Singapore used a leveraging strategy, high levels of FDI, but the same conditions were applied in a way where if Singapore expected to upgrade, it only approved firms at that sort of technological level. This is what the Economic Development Board did to show that sort of thing, to enjoy those incentives. In fact, there are many examples where it mistakenly invited disk drive firms, not realizing it's really a labor-intensive set of firms. They just remove incentives from them, and all of them moved out to Malaysia and subsequently to Thailand and China. Now, in the case of Brunei, largely driven by petroleum and gas, it's now working on a similar strategy as Singapore. It's inviting, it can be even foreign firms, you provide what it's expecting, you enjoy those incentives, because it's concerned that at some point oil and gas will dry off. And therefore, from 2018, in this book that I just mentioned earlier, the Brunei chapter talks about expanding downstream processing, expanding resource-based industries. Now, these are the countries, Cambodia, Laos, PDR. Unfortunately, Philippines has stagnated, is also there, and Myanmar. Timor-Leste is only starting now. In fact, I've been there. It's very much into sedentary farming, even simple processing. It's something they send to Indonesia, for example, to harvest the skin of animals, and then, of course, it's stand there and exported from there. Now, I just wanted to show this part of it. You see a rise in the share of manufacturing in GDP, and most of them showing a decline, except for Brunei. I put Brunei there because of the from 2017 to 2018, it's showing emphasis as a share. This is for the transition economies, Cambodia, Laos, PDR, Timor-Leste, and Vietnam. Now, I'd like to finish with these conclusions because I felt I needed to focus a lot more on time. I mean, on answering questions if they pose to me. Only South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong, province of China, have developed to achieve industrial upgrading to high value-added activities. The LDCs remain in LDCs, except for countries like Cambodia. They are actually moved up slightly higher than an LDC. That country may not be enjoyed by them anymore to enjoy everything but arms exports of garments or exports of garments to the US under the ILO, honoring the ILO conventions. Now, in the case, Singapore is in high value added activities, so it's the case with Korea and Taiwan. You can also include Hong Kong in that sense. But Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, they are in low and medium value-added activities. They haven't really moved even anywhere near. I can tell you that the per capita income in China, 1.4 billion people, in 2024 was $12,600 US. Malaysia is 11,700 with 34 million people. Taiwan and Korea's per capita income exceeded that of Japan, close to 40 million. Singapore's is 95,000 US dollars, 2024. It's, I think, something like in the top 10 per capita income countries. Luxembourg has the highest, and of course, Ireland, Netherlands, and so on follow after that. Now, despite massive differences in geographical and historical endowments, the Southeast Asian experience shows that the nature of policy execution has played a critical role in the different outcomes enjoyed by the individual economies. Much depends on political stability, of course that's critical, continued cooperation among the countries, and strong persuasion to seek diplomacy to achieve political, economic, and social consensus. I'm sure you all know that there was an efforts to broker peace between Thailand and Cambodia. For a while, both President Donald Trump, and my Prime Minister Anwar claimed that they were behind brokering that, but now the peace is gone. It's broken down, and it obviously affecting Thailand. In the spirit of appropriating collective synergies through cooperation among ASEAN members, the ASEAN Secretariat should strengthen collaboration among these countries to share best practices. The next Secretariat will be in Philippines. Malaysia is just passing the baton there, including instruments associated with environmental and social governance. I'd like to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Raja. I would just highlight some of the points he has made. This has been a little more complex model that actually can be comprehended in such a short time. And just to actually highlight some of the capital flight, I mean the ability of the countries to attract capital would be varying depending upon the level of income of the nation and so on. I'm not sure it has really taken place so strongly everywhere. However, we would say it's important to have FDI for industrialization. And then he cited the example of Mexico and others. That's quite interesting stories. Another issue that he actually highlighted is the deindustrialization and upgrading and so on. Well, at certain stage, the traditional industries certainly face stagnation and decline and need to be revamped and must be done with policy changes and so on. The example of Pakistan and others are quite elaborate examples. The issue of R&D, innovation, patents and commercialization play an important role in the manufacturing industry's development, and the pace of innovation and the speed with which this is commercialized, of course, have impact on the industrial development. And towards the end, he has actually talked about the policy formulation, execution, the role of these things in the industrialization, particularly of the growth of industry and so on. So certainly there is a need for an industrial upgrading, and that has to be done keeping in view the development in the technology, innovation, and so on. Let me thank Dr. Raja Rasia for an excellent presentation of a very complex issue, and I guess his book, when it comes out, would be an eye-opener for the policymakers as well as for the researchers and academics as well. Thank you, Dr. Rasia. Now over to Ben.
Thank you so much. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Ahmed Hassan. Is the Director of Policy Research Institute of Bangladesh. He holds a PhD in economics, a macroeconomist by training. He is currently researching Bangladesh growth, economic geography, urbanization, and decentralization issues, in addition to writing on economic development within the region. He has led World Bank projects in policy dialogues and development policy reform, lending in Africa, East Asia, and Southeast regions. Currently working with the IMF and other regional bodies like ADB, FDB, ASIAD, and he is a lead author of several World Bank reports. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me to welcome Dr. Hassan to the podium.
Good morning, Shubho Shakal. Thank you all for joining us this early in the morning, and if you're hearing me. So I guess one interesting point, as I was explaining to Dr. Rasia, is my PhD supervisor was Jagdish Bhagwati, who he was referring to out here. So we have that connection. So let me say something. This is a tough presentation. This is a tough presentation in the sense that I will be talking about many of the difficult challenges that is now confronting Bangladesh right now, right? So in that sense, and it will be very Bangladesh specific, I'll give some international. Sure. Hello, 1, 2, 3. Is this good? Yeah. All right. I used to be a university teacher both in Dhaka and in New York, so I'm used to walking around on the platform. So, all right. So, and there will be, by the way, to the my colleagues in the chair, a number of diagrams. You may want to sort of shift your chairs and so on. So, all right. So, right now, this is a challenging world, right? Globally and at home, we have fair amount of chaos in international economics at this particular point, and there are big issues going on at home. So graduation and the middle income trap, there are two related challenges, right? There are two related challenges, but I'll give you the bottom line. The bottom line is the answer to both of these are the need to increase productivity, efficiency, investment, structural transformation, and employment. Everything, but we'll dive into the details more. The first big challenge is the graduation to the LDC category, which is due November 24, 2026, which has a number of big challenges. I'll just come to it. But that is a subset, that's a part of the bigger challenge of the middle income trap. And we'll explain that. Some of the issues that I will not touch upon is the issue of the newly emerged issue of the last 2-3 years in the power and energy sector, although I have a very recent report, but one of the foremost authorities on this issue is Professor Muhammad Tamim, Vice Chancellor of the university. So he's sitting right here. I will not talk about climate change, which is another big long-term issue. I had decided I will not discuss macro, but as I was explaining to Tamim, last night at 2 a.m. I decided, no, there are too many important macro issues. I cannot completely ignore that. All right. So, and why do I say these are challenges that can be turned into an opportunity? Because when a challenge is successfully confronted, it unleashes new sources of growth. And that is exactly what Bangladesh has, those opportunities. All right. And the last point I want to bring out is these are extremely important points, and I want to emphasize the point made by Hussein Zulli Rahman yesterday, the importance of civil society, private sector, academia, NGOs, all to come together and to press government, the politicians to make the necessary reforms and to stabilize the country. So the first big challenge that has emerged right now is to restore political stability in Bangladesh, right? And which means that what I'm saying is instability and uncertainty, they ruin economics. We know that, all right? And there are warning signs for Bangladesh. I'm giving examples from two countries, Zimbabwe and from Venezuela. Should have said there. Zimbabwe, I know firsthand. I used to travel to Zimbabwe 30 years ago, for several years. It was one of the most functional, effective countries in Africa or anywhere for that matter, in terms of human capital development, per capita income, in a number of different ways, right? And very charming multiracial society. In 10 years, it collapsed. It collapsed from $2,500 per capita income to roughly about $800 per capita income. Per capita income became 1/3 because of bad politics and bad policies. Similarly, Venezuela was for a long time one of the richest countries in Latin America, and again it took them roughly 10 years to go down from $13,000 per capita income to about $3,000 per capita income, which is roughly what Bangladesh is now, right? This is nominal dollars. So this is the kind of collapse that countries can go through if the politics and policies are not handled properly. And my point here is there are warning signs in Bangladesh for the last 2 years. We have had a major success in overthrowing an autocratic regime which created many of the deep economic problems that Bangladesh is facing now. But at this point, we have the challenge that GDP growth, which was about roughly 6.5% in the 2010s, and this, we know that not just from statistical data, we know that from nightlight data, from NASA's nightlight data intensity, so roughly 6.5% growth in the 2010s. In the last few years, growth has come down to 3.9% last year. This year, government is expecting 5%, but the international 4.5%. I think we'll be lucky to have 4.5% growth this year. And give you some example, private sector credit growth is now around 6%. Normally, it's about 15% per annum. So when the normal credit growth is 15% per annum, this year it is only, last year 6%. In the month of August, it was 0.25%. So I mean, that is the kind of slowdown the economy is going through right now. Machinery imports were down by 20% last year. In the first quarter this year, it's about down by 10%. So essentially, investment is at a standstill. Right? So this employment in 2024, roughly 2 million people have left the workforce. Right? They have not necessarily gone to unemployment roles, that's a different definition. And the expectation is this year also between 500,000 and 1 million people, will lose their jobs and leave the workforce. So millions have slipped into poverty. I'm saying this with some numbers. I can't reveal that right now because this is from a document which is going to be released sometime a few days later. So essentially, Bangladesh is at this point, the political instability in Bangladesh is playing with fire. I want to emphasize that point. My talk is aimed at middle income trap issues, which are medium term issues, but in the short term, we have major emergency which we have to tackle. And the straightforward answer to this is we need to return to political order and stability as soon as possible. And as far as I can understand, that can only happen through elections. All right. I will not spend much time on the LDC graduation. The basic point is Bangladesh has done so well that since 2015, 2018, it has satisfied all three criteria to graduate from least developed into LDC in terms of per capita income, human capital, environmental, and other shock issues. And so it is since 2022, it has been ready to become a LDC. But that means we will be losing a whole bunch of preferences. We get duty-free tariff, quota-free access to EU, which gives us a big tariff advantage. We get TRIPS waivers. We get waivers from a number of international conventions. We get concessional loans. All this will go away, right? All this will go away and which will lead to significant losses in terms of export revenues, in terms of losses, job losses, pharmaceuticals, and so on. So this is the challenge Bangladesh is facing right now, and the straightforward. This week I met an international delegation who were out here to assess Bangladesh readiness, and I think it became obvious that Bangladesh is not ready. It's not ready because we have had a number of shocks. We have had the pandemic, we have had the macroeconomic instability which started from 2022. Then we have the political economic trouble right now. And so now graduation without preparation means that it will be another big shock for the economy. And on a lighter note, let me say one of the interesting comments that the delegation made, which was discussed yesterday when we had this panel between the private sector and academia. So the delegation mentioned that since the last 6 years, there have been so many good papers written about Bangladesh's graduation and what needs to be done. So much of discussion, but no action. So this is, I think, the point of execution that Dr. Asia was saying. The one big difference between East Asia and South Asia is they are not only they do the talk, they also do the walk. But South Asia is different. All right. So the bottom line is we will need to request a deferment of about 2-3 years. But as we discussed, it has to be backed up by a very hard time-bound plan. How will Bangladesh meet the requirements for graduation? How will it increase efficiency, productivity, etc., and so on? And all this is related to the middle income trap. What is the middle income trap? The middle income trap is that as countries approach the middle income level, as countries start nearing the high income level, which is roughly given at 45% of the US per capita income and purchasing power dollars, right? So $35,000 in 2020, and in that year Bangladesh's per capita income in purchasing power dollars was about $8,500, right? I will not go into the definition. This is a dollar which adjusts for differences in prices. In the US, if I need to get even a simple haircut, I'll have to spend $30, which is about 3,000 takas. Sorry, about almost 3,500 takas. In Bangladesh, the requirement is far less. So once you adjust for that, the exchange rate becomes about 33 takas to a dollar, not 120 takas to a dollar, right? So that's why the point is, this is the threshold. What happens is when countries like China, India is way out here, and others, they approach the high income level of roughly $35,000 US dollars, then productivity slows down, growth slows down. Why does it happen? Because although investment takes place in physical capital, education, institutions, innovations, they don't develop as fast. So even though you can have a lot of investment, a very good example is, for instance, in East Europe in 1991-92, they had very high levels of physical infrastructure. They had very high levels of human capital. But even then, their productivity and income collapsed completely. Why? Because their institutions collapsed. There was no organization, no ways. So you need a number of things. You need not just investment, you need education, you need institutions to make sure that productivity growth continues. And often countries can't do that. Yeah. And Bangladesh is out here. It has escaped from the low income, gone to the middle income. It's still a long way to go to become a middle income, high income country. All right. This is, I'm just for the sake of it, this is the World Bank's official definition of last year, which is based on a more bureaucratic definition of nominal per capita income dollars. Bangladesh is out here. I mean, I don't want to dwell on this. This is, I would say, not very satisfactory in terms of its framework. So just to give you an example, another example is using again purchasing power parity dollars. So 35% is, say, the threshold. You see all these countries for the last 30 years, Chile, Thailand, Mexico, all struggling along the border, but they can't cross and become a higher income country for the reasons that I've explained to you. China is coming up, but as I will explain to you, even though China has now become a technological leader, its growth has sharply slowed down. Its productivity growth has sharply slowed down for a number of different reasons. This is a technical matter, a structural imbalance. They have excessive savings. Their consumptions are not driving enough growth, so they need to export. So they have a big demand issue. Then they have excess capacity, a number of factors. Most of all, which I'll come to immediately, they have an aging problem, what they call the 4-2-1 problem. Because of the one-child policy, so one husband and wife couple, they have to support, one person has to support both his parents, his or her parents, and the grandparents. So basically one person ends up having to support his retired parents and the grandparents. So you can immediately see the burden that one person has, right? So, and I will not go into this is Professor Mamoon has taken responsibility. He told me that this is a very academic discussion. You should make it technical. So I'm just joking, but I will not discuss any of the equations. Let me just turn to the last one. Roughly, you can decompose per capita income and its growth into three factors. The first factor is productivity of labor, right? That labor and the education, the productivity of labor. Second factor is employment. And the last factor is the working age demographics, the share of working age population. And so I've explained this to you. So we will discuss mostly the last equation 4, and to give you an example, so labor productivity is in the long run the most important thing. Countries can only grow in the long run if productivity grows up and labor productivity grows up, right? So this is, if you will, a long run outcome from 2019. You see very almost perfect match between per capita income levels and labor productivity of countries. However, if you go down below the developing country levels, then you will find that even though many countries have high labor productivity, their per capita income levels are not that high, right? And the reason for that is that the demographic dividend, that those countries have not been able to use the demographic dividend and employment. Look at the East Asia four countries. This is from my paper from only 10 years ago. So Korea, Malaysia, Thailand, China. A beautiful match between the rise of per capita income and the share of working age population, right? So when countries have a larger number of working age population in the population, then their per capita income goes up mathematically. It follows by one of those equations I mentioned. And you can see that the results are very strong. So in Bangladesh now, we have that challenge, as I think Hussain Zulurfai was mentioning yesterday. So roughly around 2021, we are reaching our peak demographic dividend in the sense of nearly 68% of the population is now in a working age population, right? And that window will continue for the next another 16 years, and I would say for the next 30 years. Next 30 years, we will have a very high share of working age population as a part of the overall population, and that opportunity is now in front of us to use. However, to do that, we will need to employ people, right? So, and this is the difference between East Asia and Pacific and Bangladesh. In East Asia and Pacific, the employment rate, the people who actually work in the working age population is anywhere from 70% to about 66%. In Bangladesh, it's around 58%. What is the big reason for this difference? Can anyone take a guess? Why does East Asia have such a high employment ratio, and why does Bangladesh have a low employment ratio? Can anyone take a guess? Please. Productivity could be, but no, women. Female participation. Yeah. So the difference is in East Asia, female participation rates are around the same, around 60, 65, 70%. In Bangladesh, a loose definition says 35% participation rate, but actually a tighter definition will tell you it's about 25% female labor force participation rate. So any talk that, as we are hearing now, the idea that women should work less, they should go out to home, is completely self-defeating, right? These are very relevant points right now. I'm saying, this is in a sense total madness. What we need, in fact, is to educate more women, put them to the workforce. At the same time, we have to make sure that child care facilities are provided. Those things are, the number of win-win opportunities out here. But a country cannot grow in the long run without female labor force participation. All right. So, and the problem that we have is our employment growth has sharply fallen. To give you an example, in urban areas, employment growth has fallen from 4% to 0.8%. From 2010 to 17, it was 4%, and recently it has fallen to less than 1%. In industry, employment growth has actually turned negative, right? So as a result, you see a lot of now very surprising result, more people working in agriculture. That is not supposed to happen in a good growing economy. And as we were discussing last, the more educated you are in Bangladesh, higher is your unemployment possibility, because again, there is a skills mismatch in education. All right. So what is the reason? One reason why is education not working, because education quality and training is very important. How much time do I have now? Okay. How much?
Yes, so you're almost running out of time. Just conclude it if you can.
No, I'll take another 5-6 minutes.
Yeah, no problem, no
Okay.
problem.
Yeah, so I'll start it. Yeah, good. Challenge 2 is education quality. This is the famous research result of Professor Hanushek of Stanford University. In the World Bank, 10-15 years ago, it was a big concern. What is it? So many people are being schooled, but there is no impact on education. Then Hanushek result says it is not whether they go to school, it's what they are learning. What are they learning in school? And unfortunately, here Bangladesh has a huge challenge. Bangladesh ranks about 140 out of 174 countries in terms of say, mathematical competency. Right? Vietnam is ranked 16. Can you believe that? Vietnam ranks 16. China ranked 61. India 103. But Bangladesh is 140 in terms of mathematical competency in school. And as a result, although formally we have 10 years of schooling, in real terms our schooling is only 6 years because of the lack of quality. And this is, I will not repeat this, this is in 2017, they say roughly 90% of 80% of students in 2017 in grade 5 did not have the mathematical level of grade 5. It's only 15% who had it. All right. Secondly, we discussed yesterday, I will not go into it, technical and vocational education, Bangladesh far behind East Asian countries and Germany for that matter. Challenge 3 is the weak financial depth and stability. I will not go further into this. We all know that every day the news is coming out. This is in fact data from 2019. The actual data right now is far worse, right? Here, for instance, it says that Bangladesh's NPL is 10%. Now we know it is 30%, right? I sometimes wonder how my colleague, Governor Ahsan Mansoor, sleeps at night as I look at capital adequacy ratio and other things. And this matters because one big area is the SME sector is significantly underfinanced in Bangladesh. And without significant financing of SME sector, you can't have enough employment. All right. Then challenge 4, we need a diversified economy. So look at Bangladesh's economic structure. This is based on the Harvard Economic Complexity Lab. So Bangladesh is basically all garments. And this is Vietnam. This is electronics, right? This is garments. This is agro-processing. They have over $40 billion of agro-processing exports. And we have the potential to do all that. I know from field trips to North Bengal and other areas, we have that potential, but we don't have. One important thing is you cannot, and I will say this from 40 years of experience, you cannot have advanced technology and diversification without foreign direct investment. Yes, because as again Hussein Zillur Rahman was saying, that is not only the funding, but it's also the knowledge, the experience, the market contacts. So we have to get much more FDI in the country. And I will not go further. This is roughly that without economic complexity and diversification, you cannot grow, period. We cannot grow. And in Bangladesh, unfortunately, we have been declining in terms of economic complexity, more and more dependence on garments. So, all right. Then I will not go, there are very significant trade policy issues which have to be addressed. I will not go further into that. Let's go to challenge 5. Challenge 5 is urbanization challenge. Bangladesh is now at a very low stage of urbanization, but it is in a very poor state. As I think Professor Rasia was saying that, keynote talks, we are used to giving, having 1 hour. Day after tomorrow, I will be talking about this slide for nearly an hour in the Planning Commission and the UN agencies. So I'm just saying, so Bangladesh is out here. The point is, just because you have people coming into the urban areas does not mean you will grow. So you can go, for instance, along the red lines, right? You have many people in urban areas, but very low income. Or you can go along the green line. You have urban development and higher income. So it depends on the quality of urbanization. And that's the other major challenge facing us. I will not go into it, all this discussion. Urban area, facilities are very poor in both health and education. In a number of districts, rural areas do better than urban areas. Number 6, the major constraint. We are one of the most revenue-starved country in the world. We are in the bottom 7-8% of countries in terms of revenue collection, and which means that our per capita expenditures in comparable dollars, say in Bangladesh, is roughly 1/4 that of India or Vietnam. So that's the other big challenge. We just don't spend enough money on public goods and resources. The last point is, this is another area where I have done a lot of work. I can speak for hours and papers. Bangladesh is one of the most centralized countries in the world. If you look at in terms of share of GDP and share of expenditures, local governments are the least financed among similar sized countries. So this is Mexico, this is Vietnam, which have roughly similar, slightly smaller populations. But we are way down here in terms of financing local governments. And the point here is, there's no accountability at the local level. So how can you expect good public services in towns and villages if there is no accountability there, right? So then, and you cannot meet the SDG targets, as we were discussing yesterday. Healthy competition, regional competition in Vietnam, China, Indonesia, Germany. I mean, so Mr. Naseem Manzoor, for instance, he said something yesterday I disagreed with. He was saying Vietnam's growth is because of its highly centralized. No, it's actually the other way around. He later agreed. Vietnam has highly decentralized provinces, powerful provinces, who are constantly competing with each other. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so very much, Dr. Hassan, for a very insightful presentation here. Definitely lots of work has gone into your presentation. I wish we had more students listening to this presentation, because they would benefit a lot from this macro analysis for some of your projects. There's challenges that have been raised here. A number of them have been raised. For example, stability issues, the quality of education and training, in some cases, lack of diversification within the economy. The urbanization issues have also been raised as a key challenge for the country. I like your statement here. I like your statement where you said challenges present opportunities for growth and innovativeness within organization. I think the information that has been presented to us, whether we are students, whether we're researchers, whether company directors or entrepreneurs, this information is vital for informed decision making. Without taking much of your time, ladies and gentlemen, we want to invite questions. The presenters are here to answer any questions. Do we have somebody to ask a question?
We are going to receive 2 questions. Can you please hand out the mic?
How many? Only 2 questions. Okay. Good.
Yes.
Actually, I am Dr. Shah Alam, Dean, Bangladesh Army University of Science and Technology, Soyedpur. I have 2 questions. One is Raja Rasia, another is Dr. Ahmad Hassan. First one is Raja Rasia. We know country's economic development depends upon optimum utilization of resources in a country, in a particular, and in a globe in general. The Malaysia is developing very fast. I want to know what about the domestic investors in Malaysia? What are the incentives Malaysian government is provided for for attracting foreign investors in Malaysia? This thing I want to know. And another question is Ahmad Hassan. That is it is very research-based presentation, very nice presentation you have given. Now that is until the findings is implemented. That is we cannot get the result, because there are many researchers in Bangladesh doing research. They have very nice, that is findings that is come out from that research, but there is no implementation. That how this can be implemented? What should be the provision? That is we can take to implement that findings here. Otherwise, East Asia, Asian countries, that is that female workers are working more and more than male workers. Their economic development is growing up gradually. That is in Bangladesh, it's a very problem. Now, how we can implement this thing? Okay, thank you very much.
Should I start answering? Yeah, thank you. I think they were really good questions. I thought I should provide some sort of an assessment in relation to how capacity utilization is done before I go to your second part of the question, which is to look at the incentives that are provided to the entrepreneurs, including small and medium enterprises. The first one is, let's go to the example of Korea. While I like the concept, it's really something I would say lucid in terms of saying there's such thing as potential GDP growth, GDP, and real GDP. Now, the case of Korea proved Bob Lucas wrong, the Nobel laureate. Korea grew by annual average growth rate, the entire 70s grew by more than 10%. If you use that argument, Korea would have crashed. It would have crashed because it was growing more than the potential GDP growth. It's a question of how was the potential estimated. The same thing I would refer to the use of Paul Romer's use of endogenous technical change. If you look at the work that was done, the East Asian growth, the tyranny of numbers, 94, East Asian growth, a contrarian view by Alvin Young. Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong, using their argument, had enjoyed very low TFP growth rates, 0 to 0.1%. They would have crashed. In fact, in their table, in his own table, Pakistan and Botswana had higher TFP growth rates. So sometimes we have to look at the measures, whether they actually reflect the concept behind that. The same thing with capacity utilization. Are we really, and then it changes with time because you have different components to it. You have different estimates, different controls to it, and a whole range of other things that happen. Have that been taken into account? Now, coming back to your point on incentives, now, I would say the distinction that differentiates the Northeast Asian countries from Malaysia, for example, your question is pointed to Malaysia, is that incentives use the sort of argument of carrots and sticks approach of Amartya Sen. You provide the carrots, there must be sticks. Malaysia never had a stick. If you look at it, the Taiwanese case, very well elaborated now, not just by Robert Wade, many others, but also Korea. If you didn't perform, you were removed from the system very quickly, so you didn't sap the system. Park Chung-hee, under the 1975 Heavy and Chemical Industry Program, gave interest rates to those chosen chaebols and the ones he thought would perform at rates close to 2%. Black market rates, the rates outside there were over 20%. But he made sure that none of them continued if they didn't perform. The quota that he used is in Alice Hampson's book, Asia's Next Giant, that you need to export more and more in order to enjoy your tariffs within the country too. All that properly applied, executed. He even sent his own relative to jail, his uncle to jail, because the guy was speculating, taking the money and speculating in the country. He went to jail. So that sort of conditions, we have loads of it. One MDB will be one, as Professor Kalinan there. I think they should do that. If we want to ensure that the same with technological upgrading, you need to see that they are actually upgrading. If not, you have to find out why. If your system has been wrong, your mechanisms have been wrong, rework it, or if people are just abusing the system, tighten up the selection process. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Hassan, could you please address the question? And we are not receiving any more questions. We are running a bit slow.
Right. No, thank you. That is the heart of the problem. That difference between East Asia and South Asia is, as I say, they walk the walk, we talk. So how do we respond to that? I mean, I can think of three ways, right? One is public pressure, civil society, the people, coming together and putting pressure on the rulers to work. And there actually, democratic politics, accountable politics can be helpful. If the governments know that if we don't perform well, we will be actually thrown out of the next election, that puts pressure on them. And that is why, as Dr. Taweem and I were discussing before this, so Bangladesh between 1991 and 2013, after 4 fair elections, did the best performance. The golden age of Bangladesh's development as of now was between 1991 and 2013-14. Once they started tampering with the elections, there was no accountability. So one is to make sure there is political accountability. The other is to engage with politicians. I mean, that's why very famous economists, not everybody, but very famous economists in the US, they are aligned with various political parties and they're advising them and so on. So you have to be, directly, involved. So these are the two, major ways I can think of. And the third is a miracle that we have some kind of very wise leader who comes, implements everything. But you can't wait for that. We have to act.
Yes.
Thank you, esteemed speakers and session chairs. May I now request Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor M. Tamim, sir, and Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Daniel W. Lund, to kindly get on the stage and hand over the token of appreciations.
Round of applause for our guest. Sir, could you please join? Now, our honorable Vice Chancellor will present crest to Dr. Raja Rasaya. Please, a round of applause for our speakers. It was a very intense session. Dr. Raja Rasia is receiving praise from our Honorable Vice Chancellor. One more time, may I request our Honorable Vice Chancellor to present crest to our another speaker, Dr. Hassan. Dr. Hassan is receiving crest from our Honorable Vice Chancellor. Now, may I request our Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Daniel W. Lund, to present a token of appreciation to our chair, session chair, Professor Rob, Professor Abdul Rob. Professor Abdul, can you please help? Can you please help? Yes, Professor Abdul Rob is receiving a token of appreciation from our Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor. Thank you very much. Now, Dr. Wen will also receive token of appreciation for chairing the session from our Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor. Thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate your presence and insightful sessions.
Thank you, everyone.